All right. Thank you. So we'll resume now. I need everyone to quiet down so we can resume our agenda. And I'll turn to Parliamentarian Johnson so that we can establish a quorum.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I will begin calling the roll with the chair. Chair Moore,
Present.
Vice Chair Brown,
Present.
Member Bradford,
Here.
Member Grills. Here. Member Grills is present. Member Holder.
Here.
Member Holder is present. Member Jones Sawyer. Member Jones Sawyer is absent. Member Lewis. Here. Member Lewis is present. Member Montgomery Stepp.
Here.
Member Montgomery Stepp is present. And Member Tamaki.
Here.
Member Tamaki is present. Madam Chair, there are 9 task force members and the number needed for a quorum is 5. The number present is 8. Madam Chair, a quorum has been reestablished.
Thank you, Parliamentarian Johnson. Now that a quorum has been reestablished, we will resume our agenda item, which is number 20, discussion and potential action item, plan for future meetings, including schedule, whether virtual, and subject matters to be addressed. Before me and Member Jovan Scott Lewis share our thoughts around this agenda item, I just wanted to check in with my fellow task force members to see if you all had any thoughts about this particular agenda item and what we discussed before the break. Totally fine if no thoughts right now, but just wanted to open space for that opportunity. Member Montgomery Stepp, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Moore. I have a few thoughts, and I don't, this may be a little bit premature based on what you and Member Scott Lewis will share, but I did have a couple of thoughts. One is just with even the 2 committees broken up that are issue-based, those issues, especially in the second committee, are very, very, very heavy. So the mass incarceration, health harms, and education are very, very heavy to put in one advisory committee. Also, we know this is, it's much easier to schedule advisory committee meetings without all of the, notice and I won't say pomp and circumstance of all of that, but, we know it's a logistical, basically nightmare for the DOJ. I also know that going into this phase where we are essentially trying to answer these questions and present possible proposals based on what I'm thinking is, in addition to direct cash compensation, which you kind of talked about through with the economists, the monetary, non-cash, and the non-monetary. That is just really hard to have an advisory committee with 2 people and then come back to a body of 9. Just with the amount of substance that I think will take place and what will be required from members. So I just want to put that out there. And then the third thing I'll just say is just based on the 5 questions. One is I want to get clarity of what the direction the task force gave yesterday with regard to the economic, let me say it right, Economic Expert Committee, and exploring some of the questions, but in particular the California residency question, which I think will be a global, it may be a global answer that we come up with as an umbrella for all of the issues. So I wanted to throw those things out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the task force members? Preliminary thoughts about what we talked about and what was presented before our break?
So this is just in the nature of thinking out loud. Various members of the task force have subject matter expertise on a number of their areas. They have staffing also for the legislators. There may be particular interest in the different subject matters, and depending upon what Member Lewis and the chair proposes, maybe we could work within that framework to kind of self-select. I mean, if there are task force members that are interested in any particular area and really want to pursue that, with great gusto, enthusiasm, maybe that would be a natural way to proceed. Just find out what people's interests are.
Actually, I think that Member Montgomery Stepp and Member Tamaki's comments are in perfect alignment with, I think, what we discussed. So, Member Lewis, did you? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you both for those comments. And Chair Moore is right. They are rather in line with what we're trying to propose. So there are a couple of issues that we have to address. One is the timing of the work going forward, the limitations that we have in terms of our ability to meet, our availability to meet, and of course, Bagley Keene and the immense work that is ahead. And so we are trying to basically find a way to accommodate all of those constraints while still, I think really trying to do this thing right. So if you can go to the first page, which is staff recommendation regarding advisory committees in your handouts. As Member Montgomery Stepp mentioned, right, the 5 questions really are a kind of universal concern. And there's an issue, given Bagley Keene, where I think there's going to be a challenge in trying to
Sorry, Member Javonska Lewis. We just want to make sure everyone's on the same page. We're looking at staff recommendations, so that's page 3.
Yeah. It's not my fault. Okay.
Okay. All right. We're all on. Are we there? Yeah. Just scroll down.
Is that it?
Yeah,
that's it.
All right. Yes, that's it.
Okay,
Thank
so again, as Member Montgomery Stepp mentioned, the 5 questions really are universal ones, or global ones, is how I think you put it. And so the recommendation is that Chair Moore and I would continue in our capacity as now one of the advisory committees and work on those 5 questions and how they apply to the 6 areas that come up in bullets 1 and 2, starting with unjust property takings and ending with education. Beyond that, and I should add that we're talking about these areas being areas of concern around coming up with recommendations for compensation. And so beyond that, what we would like is to propose that in clusters of 2 topics, we invite task force members to volunteer to join in an advisory committee of 2 members to tackle 2 topics each. So for example, there would be a pair of task force members who would work on unjust property takings and the devaluation of Black businesses. There would then be a second advisory committee of 2 task force members that would tackle housing discrimination and mass incarceration. There would be a third advisory committee of 2 task force members that would work on health harms and education. And so these are all very weighty. And the idea of 2 people, working on these, is daunting. But the purpose is to bring back recommendations to the task force. So the responsibility is not to, make final recommendations, but to, work with the DOJ and with the economic experts team to, kind of do a deeper analysis and to bring back to the task force some preliminary recommendations for us to all to vote on and to move ahead with. And so as I mentioned earlier, Chair Moore and I would then work on what could be considered the kind of 4th advisory committee, which would be tackling the 5 questions and thinking about them, in that global manner, as Member Montgomery Stepp mentioned earlier. Okay, so there's more work to be done. And so if you go to the following page, which is page 4, there's a section working with DOJ staff on areas not addressed in experts' list of atrocities. So as mentioned by the experts team yesterday, these are the areas that came up in our preliminary report, in which we've heard testimony on over the past year, that they said that they are unable to quantify as far as finding a compensatory model to advance as a form of redress. And along with the section below, remaining issues, these two sections actually represent areas of our scope of work that fall outside of a compensatory framework. And so what we would ask task force members to do is to work with the DOJ, but not with the economic experts team, on coming up with what we might think of as non-compensatory, sorry, let me just say non-compensatory, yeah? I don't want to drop the O's too many times. Recommendations to bring back to the task force. And so, again, that would be on issues of enslavement, racial terror, political disenfranchisement, the pathologization of the black family, control over creative, cultural, and intellectual life, the racial wealth gap, in addition to, under the remaining issues, elimination of racist laws and policies, appropriate ways to educate the California public on our findings, as well as how and what form a formal apology should take. And so in total, in those two areas, there are 9 topics. And so what we will be asking is for each of us to take on one of those 9 topics. And so in that regard, it would be an advisory, committee of one, so to speak. But again, the role of us in that capacity would be just to work with the DOJ and try to find some form of recommendations to bring back to the task force that we can then work with to provide our actual formal recommendations. So the hope is that if we can do this, then we might actually be able to, have something significant to report on in our December meeting, which, unfortunately will likely be our next meeting because, as noted, we were unable to find a quorum to meet before then. So that's the proposal from Chair Moore and myself.
Thank you, Member Javon Scott Lewis. Vice Chair Brown, did you have a comment?
Madam Chair, members of the task force, to get us moving, I volunteer for Homes and Health and Education.
Yes, so let me just first summarize and make sure we're all on the same page. Thank you so much that was very clear, Member Javon Scott Lewis. So I think the proposal that we're coming up with is that we would have one advisory committee that comprises of myself and Member Javon Scott Lewis to address those 5 questions that seem to be more global in nature around damage timeframes, residency requirements, and all of that, right? So there's one advisory committee, again, that comprises of me and myself and Javon Scott Lewis, who would deal with those 5 questions. Then there will be 3 additional advisory committees that would take or volunteer to take 2 topics each, and that's on page 3. And then we go to the second page, we would, as a task force, each of the 9 members would volunteer to take one of the 9 topics on that second page, right?
That's right. And I think, in listing the groupings for the compensation advisory committees, I just listed them in order that they're listed. So, if you want to discuss what, better pairings there might be, if we want to, go back to Member Tamaki's, suggestion earlier about finding, areas that members are interested in, we can do that. But I made those pairings for convenience and just for clarity, so you could follow them on the sheet.
Okay, and Vice Chair Brown, going back to us coming up with better pairings, I think he already volunteered to do health harms and education. So that could be a pairing. So that would mean we would need another person to volunteer with Vice Chair Brown to serve on that committee, correct?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm saying is that I'm not necessarily recommending that these are the pairings. If everybody's fine with those pairings, then we can move ahead with them. I'm just clarifying that I listed them because that's the order in which they were listed in the actual sheet we were provided by the DOJ.
Yes. And I'm just saying, since Vice Chair Brown already took the initiative, I think we should go for it.
All right.
And what do you all think about that? Member Montgomery Stepp?
I just have a clarifying question just about the second page, the areas that are not addressed in the experts list of atrocities. It says 9, but I'm counting 7. I think
Oh, yeah.
plus the remaining issues, okay.
That's remaining issues.
So it wouldn't be, okay, all right, got it. Thanks for clarification.
Yeah, so there's 6 under the table of working with DOJ staff on areas not addressed in experts list of atrocities, and then 3 remaining issues for a total of 9. Yes, Member Tamaki, you recognize?
This is in the nature of thinking out loud, it's not a proposal, but for instance, eminent domain and housing is subject matter related. So that might make it easier for pairing. Mass incarceration over policing, and some of the things about education, especially school-to-prison pipeline and discipline, is related to each other. I don't want to break up things that have already been suggested, but that might be another related pairing. I'm just trying to figure out ways to create commonality and synergy.
Yeah.
So,
Help streamline the work.
yeah. Black business, maybe as a standalone, I'm not quite sure, but at least I see 2 categories where there's some overlap.
Okay, so going back to, oh, go ahead. Yeah, sorry, Member Holder, you're recognized.
Just another idea to throw into the pot. The remaining issues also seem kind of global and thematic to me. So I am wondering whether for each of the harms, however we separate them, whatever advisory committee is doing a harm might want to do those 3 remaining issues as related to the harm that they're covering.
Sure.
That's just one other way to conceive of this, to formulate it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could, and so that's why I was recommending we do the stuff on page 3, and then we can just say, well, because individuals would have to take on what's happening on page 4. And so I think you could absolutely accommodate that,
Yeah.
for sure.
So I guess the first step is to really hone in on what the committees are going to be, and then assign the individual, if we agree to that, the individual ones. I do, just as far as the 3 committees with the 6 issues, they're all interconnected. Housing and houselessness is also connected with the criminal legal system quite a bit. And in eminent domain, there are quite a few black businesses that were lost based on that too. So it's kind of tough. So I can, I'll go with the task force. I am interested in black business devaluation.
So pairing,
I would take either one, what you proposed or what.
so maybe that's a logical connection, and houselessness would go with another category.
Well, there's an intersection between houselessness and criminalization, black mass incarceration.
Chairman,
Yes.
we did mention there how our watering holes
Yep.
have been destroyed. So the houselessness, eminent domain, and our basic communities have been destroyed through eminent domain. They're all related, those three.
Can you repeat the ones you said?
The destruction of our watering holes, our cultural enclaves, vis-a-vis Allensworth, South Central Los Angeles, the Fillmore. Where? Beverly, yes. Along with them name, that's land. Correct.
The restoration of the black watering holes?
Yeah, I was just saying that the restoration of the black watering holes seems like it would fit under the rubric of unjust property takings by eminent domain and devaluation of black businesses.
And we should remember that these areas are what, the atrocity areas that the economic experts team, with guidance from the task force and the advisory committee have come up with. This is what they presented on yesterday. And these are the areas that they have identified that they have data for and around which they can quantify economic redress.
So I think we reworked the pairings. So would it be devaluation of black businesses and unjust property takings is one pairing? Mass incarceration, over-policing, and housing discrimination and houselessness as another, and then health, harms, and education?
Yeah, that's the original. That's the
original?
Yeah, that's the original.
Yeah.
You're a genius.
So great, it works out. All right.
Yeah, I'm happy to work on the second one in that pairing, the housing discrimination and disproportionate black mass incarceration.
Okay.
And I would be interested in being on that one as well.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I'm being interested in unjust property taking
Okay.
by eminent domain.
So that comes with the valuation of black businesses.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
do that as well. I mean, I think it's a nexus there for sure.
Yeah.
All right.
Monica, did you? Okay,
I'm done.
So who's
So
Senator Bradford and who's?
yeah, I got Senator Bradford.
And?
But you, Don,
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that with Senator.
you want to do that one as well?
Unless, did you want to do that?
No, Camille and I are doing the 5 questions.
Okay.
So Camille and I aren't.
Monica, did you?
I did want to do devaluation of black business and.
So maybe
Unjust.
you and Senator Bradford
Okay.
on unjust. Yeah. Okay.
So then what would remain is health, harms, and education, which Brown already volunteered for.
And then, so that would leave you, Don.
Yeah.
Because you haven't signed up for one
And
yet.
Pastor Brown.
Okay. All right.
So to recap,
Yeah, so, Reggie,
oh, Reggie.
so it happens. Skip class and you actually benefit sometimes.
Yes, King, yeah.
What expressed interest in, what did they say?
No, because Reggie's not here. Sorry.
He gets mass incarceration. I mean, really, as public safety chair, he expressed interest in that.
So we have, so the thing is that there was always going to be one task force member kind of left out of these pairings.
But then he'll have an opportunity for
Yeah.
the remaining issues.
Yeah. So what we can do is we can give him, we can assign him something in the next section that might be befitting his stature and status. Yeah.
Okay, so to recap or summarize, there's going to be, on this first page, 4 different advisory committees. The first committee would comprise of myself and member Jovan Scott Lewis, and we would handle those 5 questions. The other advisory committee would be on health, harms, and education, and it would comprise with Vice Chair Brown and member Tamaki. The other advisory committee would be on the evaluation of Black businesses and unjust property takings, and it would comprise with Senator Bradford and member Montgomery Stepp. And the other advisory committee would be on mass incarceration and over-policing, as well as housing discrimination and houselessness, and it would comprise of member Grills and member Holder. Yes.
The point is well taken that Member John Sawyer is on the Public Safety Committee, chairs it. So if, as I'm thinking out loud, I could be replaced on the housing discrimination and mass incarceration by Member Joan Sawyer. And then instead of being on any of the 2-person committees, I could simply take a handful of those individual ones. So I could take the racial terror and the pathologizing of the Black family, and if necessary, enslavement. Make it equitable.
You don't have to volunteer for more work, member Grills. You don't have to do that.
Okay, then I take it all back.
But I do like the move. Yes, so now member John Sawyer replaces member Grills. I like it, yeah. I think the point.
Your subject matter expertise is in mental health. And did you want to do the healthcare instead, or? Okay. Well, I think the other stuff is equally important.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Don Tamaki, ladies and gentlemen. So that's a really good argument,
I
right?
think I'm calling you.
But you're
for
okay?
Expert.
You're okay.
Your
So member
expertise.
Tamaki. Member Grills says not today.
So member Grills, did you want to stay on that committee or swap out and?
I can swap out and take on a few of those individual topics.
And just to clarify, all the members, every one of these issues is going to come back to the full task force, and every member is going to have the opportunity to weigh in on every component of the report with suggestions and edits and things like that. So everyone will be involved in every part.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't think you need to take on the extra thing. Yeah. You've done enough. Yeah, you good. Yeah. Okay.
So, okay, we can move on to the remaining 9 issues, but I just wanted to clarify about that last committee. I also don't want to volunteer John Sawyer for something.
Well,
He's not here.
member Grills did volunteer in.
And Joan Sawyer, Joan Sawyer yesterday did say he expressed interest.
And volunteered me.
And volunteered you. So now in turn, you're volunteering him back when we're actually doing the,
Okay, so maybe, do we need to, maybe just so we can just, maybe codify this via motion so we can just move on to the next 9 items?
Can we do the other section first?
Okay, yes, we can do that.
But you want to confirm who's doing
So
what?
to confirm, there will be 4 advisory committees, One will comprise of myself, Member Jovan Scott Lewis, who will handle those 5 questions. The other will be on health harms and education, which will include Vice Chair Brown and Member Tamaki. The other advisory committee would be on devaluation of Black businesses and unjust property takings, which will comprise of Senator Bradford and Member Montgomery Steppe. And the other advisory committee would be on mass incarceration and over-policing and housing discrimination and houselessness, which will comprise of Member Holder and Member Jones-Sawyer. Okay, great. So we'll go to the remaining 9 issues. And the original plan was for each of us to pick one, but we can talk through whether that's still the plan or if we want to do something different.
Well, I'm particularly interested in appropriate ways to educate the California public of the task force findings. And unless somebody has a burning interest, that I certainly would defer to. That's one I have a high interest in.
Great.
And, with that one taken out of the remaining issues, it seems to me that there's a nice synergy here. So if you have elimination of racist laws and policies, and how and what form of apology, I think that those are thematic, and those can go with each of the 3 harms. Do you know what I mean? So I think anyone I think each of our groups should
Right.
actually be looking at
Right.
what should a formal apology on that issue look like, and what are the racist laws underneath that rubric,
Right.
and how to get rid of them.
So would that be like an advisory committee, those 2? I mean,
Yeah, so we divide those up as well, basically. That should be fine with, there's no Bobby Keene.
Okay, like something to keep in mind. Okay.
So you're saying, instead of having an advisory committee or a designee on appropriate ways to educate on formal apology and elimination of racist laws, each advisory committee or designee is going to do those 2 for their subject?
That's right. Correct.
I have a question about that.
It's okay, there you go. Thank you. Since there is an expert, I think, coming in on the elimination of racist laws and policies, so logistically, how would that work?
So we have a team of attorneys at Loyola Law School who are working through putting together a sort of a list of all of them, but whatever we can find in terms of racist laws in California. I'm trying to think, it also includes case law and things like that that are still on the books. So what we could do is we could facilitate from that compendium. It's a compendium which they're going to produce, and the idea was for it to be sort of added on to the report. We could work off of that compendium with each group to identify the ones that are key to the different subject matters, and then each group, individual or advisory committee, could figure out what they want to do in terms of the elimination of the ones that are applicable to their group. Some of them are going to be overlapping, some of them may not fall into these categories, but we can figure that out.
Okay, thank you.
So if each of the advisory groups have to consider those 2 topics, and that would just mean, it would just be 7 advisory committees, right? Instead of 9? Yes, 7 individual topics instead of 9. And I can do the racial terror. Okay. Racial terror. I would like to volunteer for control over creative, cultural, and intellectual life.
Can I just clarify for my notes, because I'm keeping notes on who's going to be responsible. I have Member Grills on racial terror, pathologizing Black families, and enslavement, Member Tamaki on educating the public, and Member Moore, Chair Moore on creative, cultural, intellectual life.
Right.
So you're just doing racial terror?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna figure out what remains. The remaining issues are enslavement, political disenfranchisement, and the wealth gap.
And family.
Oh, and pathologizing the black family, sorry.
I'll work on the wealth gap.
So the remaining,
After the pathologizing the black family.
And I think just to kind of contextualize what enslavement means, you know, in this context, we are talking about, you know, the effective indentureship of incarcerated, you know, black Americans. You know, we're thinking about those social forms of control and servitude that continue to take place.
I'll take enslavement too.
You want to take two? Okay.
So as I have down, the remaining two are political disenfranchisement and pathologizing the black family.
Member Montgomery Step will take the pathologizing the black family, right?
You know, I forgot about the political disenfranchisement. I should probably take that one.
Okay.
That's more.
Okay.
Okay, I mean, we were doing individual, we can set up,
individual,
we can set up an
okay.
advisory committee though.
I mean, it's
That'll be fine.
You can do that.
we just need it covered, to be honest.
Yeah,
What's
yeah,
left?
we're doing,
It does need
we
it,
get 2
yeah.
for 2, okay.
So you want to, yeah?
So you would do both pathologizing the black family and political just political. So that leaves pathologizing the black family.
What happened?
So there's one remaining issue, which would be pathologizing of the black family.
So you put two, you put doing two out into the universe, and it just come back to, yeah. It's,
Give
yeah,
that to
it's
Reggie.
two. It's,
Give that
it's
to
two.
Reggie.
All right.
Will you give it to Reggie?
All right, I'll do pathologizing.
Okay.
So wealth gap is gone. So
Camila, I mean, Chairman.
did they already sign up something?
Okay.
Okay.
So in terms of the remaining issues and the areas not addressed in the expert list of atrocities, there would be an advisory committee of one that would comprise of Member Tamaki around educating California's public on our findings. The other committee would be comprising of Member Grills that would cover racial terror and pathologizing of the black family. I would cover control over creative, cultural, and intellectual life, as well as enslavement. Jovan will cover the wealth gap, and Monica and Bradford will cover political disenfranchisement.
Two,
Right. No, we're off. So the only two that are technically remaining are the elimination of racist laws and policies and what form a formal apology should take. And we just
Yeah.
all agreed that each of those committees that we came up with
Right.
will incorporate that into our work.
right.
But I do have a question, because do you all envision that there's going to be one major apology or apology for each? Like,
Maybe it makes sense, of course, to have one global apology, and maybe that goes under how do you educate the public? Because it has to do with memorializing, you know, the wrong and the need of acknowledgement and, reconciliation and reckoning. So maybe if you can combine two, then I'd do those two.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's just that, you know, with the issue of apology and the elimination of racist laws, these committees will go away and, you know, figure some stuff out and then come
Yeah.
back, and then we could decide if we want to, yeah?
You know, I would think maybe Michael, you can weigh in on this, but I would think the compendium of racist laws are pretty concentrated in specific areas, like housing, for instance, racial covenants, some portion of the, you know, the Constitution having to do with that. So maybe that's not such a big lift, because it will already be focused and it'll be concentrated in specific areas. So maybe it's not something we need to have a separate subcommittee or advisory committee on. What is your sense of that?
That's my sense. I mean, I think it'll work either way. We can either do it where we do have just the compendium and it exists and it's factual. And so it can be allocated to each of the different subcommittees, or one subcommittee can handle it either way. Or it's also something that can wait until after everyone's done with everything else and then comes in and gets added to that at the end. So however you'd want to do it. And I think, same thing for apology. If you want to have apology components that arise in each of the various different contexts and then one apology, global apology, either way you want to do it, we can make it work.
Or,
And again,
Yeah.
I just reiterate, it's all going to come back to the entire task force anyway. So whatever these various advisory committees or individuals who are working with the DOJ, everyone will still have an opportunity to weigh in on the nature of the apology, how it should be made, et cetera, however it's done.
I want to reiterate that I do think each group should look at an apology that's specific to the harm.
I think that's what we're proposing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the
Yeah.
And
proposal.
that's so that we don't just siphon that
That's
off.
fine.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
that sounds fine.
So each of the advisory groups will come up with what an apology might look like for that particular harm, come back to the task force, and is the plan still for Member Tamaki to kind of take all those thoughts about what a formal apology might look like for each of those discrete areas, and then you would help to come formulate a global apology?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that as just a suggestion. Yeah, sure.
Is that what we said, or, I don't know?
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay. Okay, so I think now we are at a point where we can take potential action on what we've discussed. So I'll just summarize, and then maybe we can entertain a motion to just codify what I summarized, unless someone wants to come up with the motion right now. Okay. So in summary, I entertain a motion to codify the following, that there will be, first, an advisory committee that comprises of myself and Member Jovan Scott Lewis, who will answer those 5 questions on page 3 of the handout. The other committee would comprise of Vice Chair Brown and Member Tamaki, who will cover what policy and compensation recommendations might look like for health harms and education. The other advisory committee will be on the evaluation of Black businesses and unjust property takings, which will comprise of Senator Bradford and Member Monica Montgomery Steck. The other advisory committee will be on mass incarceration, over-policing, housing discrimination, and houselessness, which will comprise of Member Jones Sawyer and Member Holder. Then we'll have other advisory committees to cover remaining issues and areas not addressed in the experts list of atrocities. One of these committees will comprise of Tamaki, who will cover educating California public on our findings, as well as what a global formal apology might look like. Member Grills will be on a committee on racial terror and pathologizing of the Black family. I will cover control over creative, cultural, and intellectual life, as well as enslavement. Jovan will cover the wealth gap, and Senator Bradford and Member Monica Montgomery Stepp will be on the committee covering political disenfranchisement. With the caveat that each of these committees will have to consider racist laws and what an apology might look like for each of the discrete areas that we've been assigned.
I'll restate the motion for the record. Just,
Well,
For
someone
each
has to
motion-
make a motion.
Each of the advisory committees is set by motion, right? So that motion is going to be made, and at the time that motion is made, whoever is going to be the maker of the motion will yield to the staff person to state that motion on the record, unless you have it written down specifically as stated. If not, then it would be better for the attorney here to make that motion so that it's straight on the record, because sometimes it's difficult to hear. Does that make sense to do it that way? So whoever is going to be the maker of the motion, the chair is going to ask, she is prepared now to ask for a motion, and you'll go all the way through. I think there are 9.
There's 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, there's 9.
There, okay. Okay, so
Yeah, there's
that's
10.
why we need
There's
to do it one at a time, so that it's clear on the record. Okay? So, Madam Chair, if you would say you're ready to entertain a motion.
Okay, yes, that's great. So I'm ready to entertain a motion on the advisory committee around those 5 global questions.
Yes.
So maybe the person who's on the committee can. Okay. Well, it would make more sense if, like, for instance, I'm saying I'm ready to entertain a motion on an advisory committee around those 5 questions. We know who's going to be on that committee. Jovan can just make the motion. And then for health, harms, and education, Brown or Tamaki can make the motion. You can make a motion
as long as
corresponding
somebody
to the-
states the motion with the subparts.
Oh,
Someone has to state the motion. I could do that for you if you'd like.
Please.
Okay. So somebody yielded to me already, Dr. Grill.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Madam Chair, are you expecting a vote on each motion, or did you?
Together.
You
All,
want to do a cumulative motion, so she's going to do the subpart, and then we'll do one vote, is what I'm saying, as opposed to 10 votes.
Right.
okay.
And if anyone has an objection to any aspect of it, then you pull that out. Otherwise, we'll do it all together.
Yes.
Okay? So if you disagree with any part and you want to do that separately, then that's what you can do. You can pull that component out. Otherwise, it will be one motion, one vote,
One motion, one
Forward.
vote. That's right.
okay?
Uh-huh.
If,
Madam Chair, I have one clarification.
yes, sir.
guys.
We've all been listening. Let's go ahead and vote.
Member Grills has already yielded to the staff.
Okay, so on,
It's already.
on Member Grill's delegation to me, I will restate the motion as I have it down.
Thank you.
It is a motion with 10 subparts. Subpart 1, that Chair Moore and Member Lewis, as an advisory committee, will address the 5 questions laid out by the experts. Part 2 is that an advisory committee of members Bradford and Montgomery Steppe will address eminent domain and black business, devaluation of black businesses. Part 3 is that members Jones Sawyer and Holder address the components regarding incarceration and housing. Number 4 is that members Brown and Tamaki, Vice Chair Brown and Member Tamaki, address health and education. Number 5 is that Member Grills will handle racial terror and pathologizing the black family. Subpart 6 is that Member Tamaki will handle educating the public in conceptual global apology. Subpart 7 is that Chair Moore will handle enslavement and interference in creative, cultural, and intellectual life. Subpart 8 is that Member Lewis will handle the wealth gap. Subpart 9 is that Member Montgomery Steppe and Bradford will handle political disenfranchisement. And subpart 10 is that each of these groups will address the elimination of racist laws and policies, as well as specific apology components for each subpart.
Second.
Excellent.
Okay, so it has been properly moved and seconded by Vice Chair Brown that we will adopt the restated motion with 10 subparts. Is there any discussion on the matter?
That's great.
Okay. Hearing no further discussion, I'll turn to Parliamentarian Johnson for a roll call vote.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chair Brown?
Chair Moore? Aye.
Oh, my goodness. Chair Moore?
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown?
Aye.
Member Bradford? Aye. Member Grills? Aye. Member Holder?
Aye.
Member Jones Sawyer? Member Lewis?
Aye.
Member Montgomery Steppe?
Aye.
And Member Tamaki?
Aye.
Madam Chair, there were 8 members present and voting. There were 8 ayes and 0 nays.
Thank you, Parliamentarian Johnson. There are 8 ayes, 0 nays, and so the ayes have it, and the motion carries. So the next item on our agenda is item number 21, which is discussion and action item agenda for the next meeting. And that will be?
No, isn't it? It's 20.
We're still on 20, which is the future hearing schedule, I believe, yes?
Oh, yes,
We didn't
excuse me.
finish that.
We're still on 20. So now we'll go to the last.
Page 5.
Page 5.
Yeah. First, as I mentioned, the only quorum that we have would be on the days of December 14, 15, and 16. The first matter of business, I think, either in this agenda item or in agenda item 21, if you want to defer to the next agenda item, is to set that date. But starting from that date, we then have a dash to the finish. You can see that this proposed hearing schedule, actually, which I'll turn over to Member Lewis and Chair Moore to talk through, has a meeting scheduled every month. That presupposes we will have a quorum every month. So we will need to get a doodle going for the rest of the fiscal year, essentially. But with that, I'll turn it over to Chair Moore and Member Lewis if you want to discuss this, or I can also put up the other hearing schedule, which was the one circulated if you prefer, with the meeting materials.
So we're just covering what's on the page? Is that okay?
Well, it's up to you if you want to cover what's on the page and showing right now, or if you want to revert back to what was included in the meeting materials. This is incorporating some of the changes and the reporting back that we've just gone over with the advisory committees, which had not been in place when the original future meeting schedule was circulated. So this is essentially up to the minute following the vote you just took.
I think the other hearing proposal that we came up with was primarily based on the 5 forms of reparations under international law, but I don't think we're organizing I think based on our conversations, we're not doing that anymore. So,
I can discuss the thinking behind this if you want, unless you want to, like I said, all we're figuring out right now is, do you want to talk through this proposal, or do you want to go back to the
might as
proposal?
well, yeah. I don't think we're going back to the original one, so you can
Okay.
proceed.
Okay, so this proposal is built around having a final report that incorporates essentially what we've just been talking about, all the different issues written up, with input from the experts, et cetera, that builds on the interim report, sort of builds out that interim report to include all of these issues that you're discussing. So it is, this schedule, as we propose, is built around a series of returns from the advisory committees to report back on their work, get the input of the entire task force, give input to Department of Justice so we can, and the experts, so we can continue to work up issues as we move forward, and then incorporating some amount of public testimony on, as we've delineated, potential remedies and remedial programs that are occurring out currently, experts for how to address the harms that are delineated in the report, in the interim report, testimonials on how racist laws have affected people, and legislative experts and legal experts' recommendations on what recommendations from this task force should look like once we get into the part of the task force's work that discusses recommendations for the legislature's implementation of the recommendations in the report. It's a lot of recommendations. We've also planned to follow similar to how we handled the first report, which is to come to the task force with outlines for what we're calling the second report. It's really part 2 of the final report. We are planning to come back February of 2023 on the schedule. That presupposes that we're going to all be working with the experts, task force members and the experts working together and coming back and reporting back and having outlines of essentially very high-level conclusions and what people can expect to be in the final report for the task force to discuss and give some direction to both the advisory committees, the DOJ, and the experts. Then, like last time, we will take those outlines, convert them into a draft, which will come back to the task force for awareness, but not necessarily a vote. We'll have the same discussion that we had the last time, where all of you will have an opportunity to provide edits, suggestions, comments for us to incorporate, and then finally we'll come back. We scheduled here for May of 2023 to come back with a final report to present for your approval, at which point we will then finalize and prepare for publication. Any questions? The one thing I will add is that as we go through this process, you'll have an opportunity to set for each meeting what witnesses you want, how you want to have public information come in, if you want that. But a lot of this is going to be work of the task force members with the task force members. So we'll want to keep a lot of time for there to be that work and discussion.
Got it.
It's pretty straightforward. Any other comments? Questions?
So could you just state clearly, what you said was very clear. I just want to say definitively, not clearly, at what point, basically, would you be looking for us to be prepared to kind of move towards the the drafting of the final report. I'm trying to get a sense as to how many meetings do we have between now and that point, before, DOJ is like, okay, we need to start translating, what you all are doing into written form.
Well, it's a great question. And you're right, the meetings don't necessarily match up with that. So I can report that we already have deputies that are starting to work through, based on the recommendations you all already concluded in the interim report. We're already at work on the second report. So that work is starting, it's going to continue. What we're hoping is, now that we've voted on the advisory committees and the individuals, we're going to start working with you. We're going to connect you with deputies who are working on these subject matter areas. We're going to connect you with the experts. And so the work essentially starts now. Essentially, we would like to have probably those outlines that we'll be presenting in February done on our end, maybe even by early January, mid-January, collectively, with your input, so that we can then get going with drafting. The drafting, in order to meet this deadline, the drafting is going to happen at a very early stage.
Right. I'm just trying to figure out how much time we have for deliberation, to actually talk about reparations, before we have to somehow accommodate the timeline of the production of the second report or final report.
Sorry, was that a question for me?
So in the timeline, for March, you have presentation of initial draft of report 2 by advisory committees, experts, and DOJ staff for task force discussion. So what does that actually mean in practical terms? What does that actually look like? What is that?
So if you remember from report 1, when we presented the draft, I mean, that was a fairly complete draft. That would be our expectation. So I think that's where we need to be. And it's down for March. So if we get a quorum, and the only quorum we have is in early March,
Right.
that's putting a lot of pressure for us to get it done by late February, so it could be included in meeting materials. An alternative could be, if we can't get a quorum in March, we have a meeting in early April, and then the outline comes out later. We'll have the ability to move that around on a meeting-by-meeting basis. So this is you're voting on this right now. Essentially, there's two or three things that are really being locked in right now in terms of this vote is, are the meetings going to be in person or virtual? Are these the locations that you want the meetings to be in? Because then from there, we're going to do the doodle poll.
Right.
We're going to set the locations. Beyond that, if you want to change something about a particular agenda for an individual meeting, if we get to the meeting in December and there's still a lot of lack of clarity as to how things are going in terms of the developments of each of the advisory committees' workload, we can maybe push things back a little bit. So you have that flexibility, and that can be a meeting-by-meeting thing.
Right.
But it'll be a matter of,
Right.
this is sort of everybody's expectations.
Okay, no, thank you. So I asked for that definitive follow-up, just so that everybody on the task force realizes that we're basically, I think, expected to have the thing worked out by that time. So in other words, this is not us going into March, April, still trying to figure out what reparations are. And so that increases the burden on our advisory committees to take that element very seriously. Because when we meet, we will be actually bringing to the table, the majority of the work that can be done. And so that work won't actually be done in these meetings. And so I just want to make sure that everybody, fully appreciates the consequence of the timeline on what we are going to be able to do in the remaining time of the task force. And I say that because, so Chair Moore and I came up with the schedule that really, tried to accommodate, prolonged discussions on compensation, right? Because we are cognizant of the fact that we actually haven't talked about reparations directly, as it were. despite, some in the press saying that we had done so, we haven't. And so, yeah, and so I just want to make sure that we're fully aware, of what's at stake here.
So between now and March of next year, the initial draft of Report 2 is going to be presented.
So this feels like an even shorter timeline than we had to work with for the interim report listing out the harms. Not that this second part of the report or this final report needs to be anywhere near as long, but it does require a considerable amount of crossing Ts and dotting Is in terms of any recommendations need to be cross-referenced with a bunch of other things to make sure that it makes sense and it's something that legislators can work with. That being said, for the interim report, there were certain members of DOJ that worked specifically on certain chapters. Will there be something equivalent to that so that those in the various committees have a point person that will essentially be immersed in the same area or body of work as the advisory committee members?
We are still working out staffing. Obviously, you know how much staff we used, we had working on the first report. That report was very much focused on legal and historical research, putting together the compendium of documents and the bibliography and everything else that we did in that report. I think with this report, you all have point people to talk with. I have to think about exactly how we'll be able to staff, whether it'll be, I don't know that it'll necessarily be one person with the subject matter or teams of deputies, but we'll have the staff that we need to be able to support you. And we will have, probably even next week, because I'm sure they're watching this right now, and they know what's coming. So we will endeavor, now that we have a vote on who's going to be handling what subjects. I'm going to meet with a team next week. We're also going to meet with the experts next week and start working out similarly who on the expert team, if the expert team is going to be handling different specific issues among them, or if they're going to be processing things collectively. So hopefully we'll have that all worked out, and we will be in communication with each of the advisory committees or designees on their subject, because we do intend to be moving forward with all of it all together. There's nothing that's going to be sort of, we're going to do these topics now and then come back to these topics. We've got to, because of the time frame, we got to do everything together. So you'll all have new friends in the DOJ.
New BFFs. And so, I'm sorry, a related question is, do you know when we will be able to get a copy of the racist laws and policies that may, have bearing? So I'm thinking, for example, in pathologizing the black family, there are laws on the books related to relative caregivers, and that really decrease the ability of black families to take in children who are being removed from their homes.
That's a good question. I believe we're hoping that's going to be, well, we have a draft, and we'll work with the experts to try to get an answer to you all this week. I think we should have that by January. But we'll work on it. We can also, one of the things we can do is, now that we have you all engaged on the various subject matter areas, if we have a draft that we can provide, maybe you all can have stuff that you add into it as well. Or suggestions.
You're recognized.
Thank you. I just want to, since Chair Moore, Member Lewis did prepare a draft, and I'm feeling, I guess, like there's a little bit of not conflict, but based on our decision that we just made about the split up of the committees and kind of what the vision was based off of what you all prepared, I just want to make sure that we're being as inclusive as possible as to what you all thought was important for the task force to discuss, because I'm not making the connection. So if you could just take a couple of minutes to kind of walk through your process so I can make sure that what we're doing and deciding this is going to take us through to the end.
So, does staff have our proposal on hand? Or we could share?
It'd be the meeting materials, agenda item 20.
So what I can say is that, part of our thinking was wanting to make sure that we provided enough time for the task force to deliberate over the issues of compensation and to deliberate over guarantees of non-repetition and to think very clearly about what kinds of policies would then complement the kind of compensation that we might be recommending. And so just to answer your question, if there's a conflict, I don't think there necessarily has to be a conflict, as long as in the meetings that we have between now and when we're expected to really meaningfully contribute to this draft, that we have enough time in each meeting to spend on those issues. And so that could be structured as simply as those advisory committees continuously reporting back each meeting and us deliberating and incorporating that feedback, as opposed to filling the time with too many witness panels and testimonies, which at this point, Dr. Brown, I know you have a phrase to help us understand. I'm drawing a blank, but I'm just looking to you, but I know the patting the head and rubbing the belly and the other one. But I really do think that we can do it in the time frame, as long as we're not taking up too much time passively over those meetings. So I mean that's my personal view.
Okay, yep, I would definitely agree with that, and if we could be as focused as possible, if we have additional panels specifically to, to potential remedies and just very clear examples. I think we have enough in the record. And I would agree that it really needs to, as Mr. Newman said, it's coming from us, and it needs to be very substantive at this point, whatever we do from here on out.
So entertain a motion at this time around our future hearings.
And I think, Michael, you needed us to actually also talk about the locations and so forth.
I will note a couple of things.
And there's another issue as well, right?
Right, so I'll note a couple of things. Obviously, there's, the number one question is virtual or in person. As you all know, the legislature enacted a Bagley-Keene Act holiday for this fiscal year. So until the end of the task forces, or the sunset of AB 3121, this Bagley-Keene Act holiday would allow the task force to go back to being virtual meetings. So that's number one, and that would be totally up to your collective vote. The other thing I'll note is that the locations in the proposal that I've now circulated, included in your materials, did change slightly from the original one in the materials. That was because of consolidation of meetings. The meeting schedules changed a little bit and were consolidated. And so there are questions the task force should address in terms of where you want meetings to occur. I remember there was a a significant desire to do something in Allensworth, and also the locations that are delineated cover, I believe, all of the locations that came up when we first talked about where do we want to have all the meetings if we do them publicly. So anything you want to change in terms of location, obviously.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I'll turn it. Okay, now I'm back. So, actually, that was probably a good ending time anyway. You all get to decide where you want these to be generally, and then we'll try to work backwards once we get your availability in the doodle poll.
So, can you give us a little bit of background on how difficult it is for the DOJ to set up meetings, how labor intensive it is? And the reason I ask is that this agenda and what has to be done is pretty breathtaking to me in terms of the amount of work, both on the task force side, the advisory committee meetings, the meetings with the Department of Justice folks and the experts, to then basically start working up the drafts by like March. Is that right? Something like that. So is it all the same? In other words, even though we have, and there's strong reasons to meet in Bakersfield or some of the other locations, some are more remote, obviously, less accessible, more accessible. Some of the facilities that need to be set up, and we're having trouble just getting, our Wi-Fi connected here in the, California Science Center. And so, these hours begin to matter, right? If it's another day of just travel, there's no easy way to get to the Central Valley, unfortunately. And so, can you give us a little insight about whether that's a concern on the schedule or not,
Sure. So thank you very much for mentioning that. I will say we have a huge staff here that are putting this on. Obviously, it's also a Saturday. And it does require staff to drive down from Sacramento with all this technology. It's all based out of the Sacramento office. So wherever we're having the meeting, Trini and her team are going to be driving down with all this equipment from Sacramento. I will say in this location, we had a huge amount of support from member Joan Sawyer and member Bradford staffs. So that was certainly helpful. But even with that, obviously, you've seen the technological issues moving from room to room. So there are issues that come up with having meetings in person. And I think it's just everybody's basically patience with those issues as they come up. But it is significant resources in terms of staff that are here from the Department of Justice, as well as sometimes if we would ever have to pay for a room or pay for a location at a hotel, that would be a burden, and then the amount of time it takes just to set up. I think Trini and her team were here last night until very late, and then back here this morning very early to get the room set up. I know Nick was here with them the whole time, and a number of other people. So it does take a lot. And the Wi-Fi and the internet connectivity is not going to be able to be guaranteed depending on some of the places we're meeting. I wouldn't know where we would necessarily meet in the Inland Empire, Richmond, Watts, or Bakersfield, Allensworth. So that's also a consideration in terms of if we want, you saw what happened with the witnesses that were giving testimony. And that's not a small thing when people prepare their testimony and they want to be heard, and we have a lot of people who want to hear from them. It can become very difficult.
Well, I wouldn't raise this issue because these are really important places to meet. They are. But now to get this done on time is a sprint, it just sounds to me. And And to the extent that having it in, I'll call it inconvenient but desirable locations, if that greatly impacts the schedule for everybody, and including for task force members to get the job done, then I think we have to consider the balancing of that. Whether being in a location is worth the impact on the schedule and the stress that it would cause when we've got all these deliverables that have to be done within a fixed period of time. So the schedule looks very challenging to me right now.
I'll also say, in terms of our challenges in getting a quorum for this meeting, obviously it's been several months since our last meeting, and it's going to be several months until the December meeting based on quorum. That would be something else to take into consideration, and we could, if you wanted us to, do the poll for in-person and virtual on a meeting-by-meeting basis, if you wanted to consider that.
Madam Chair,
Vice Chair Brown, you're recognized.
I would like to suggest that we consider that this decision be dictated on the basis of the convenience and make it hybrid. And the staff would immediately do the research to let us know. And number two, that we will look at the importance of and the timeliness of the issues that we have to deal with, and the decision be made on the basis of that. For us, the main thing is the functionality, the practicality of our meeting in person over Gangs, doing it virtually.
So when you say research, you're saying research into the feasibility of finding locations in each of the cities named?
Yes, immediately. Let us look at whether it's practical.
Just a point of clarification, are you, Vice Chair, are you talking about doing, sort of switching off, having one in person, then one virtual, then another in person?
Based on the practical, the ABC, 1, 2, 3 of having a meeting.
That's what I was talking about, you see?
Yeah, I think he's saying based on the practicalities, not necessarily on the convenience or whims of what you want to do or not. You know what I'm saying? Like, so then that does require actual research. Like, it's not enough to say we don't know where we could have these hearings in San Diego or Sacramento. I think there needs to be some research to go into what potential locations would be.
Chair, that's what the Vice Chair was saying.
Right.
Excuse me. That based on the immediate facts given to us, the decision will be made.
So I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of trying to figure out locations. I think that's a really important factor. I agree completely. And we can, look for those locations. Again, as we did the first meeting when we were going to select where we were going to meet, we talked, and I think that's, Vice Chair, that's where you first suggested the church in San Francisco. I think Exposition Park generally was suggested for Los Angeles. I don't think we had then specific suggestions going out from there, but essentially whatever the task force votes on, we'll make happen.
Well, but time is of the essence. I guess what I'm looking for is I so appreciate your willingness to do whatever the task force asks of you, but my question is more like, what's going to negatively impact the schedule if time is of the essence? And do you have a recommendation? I'm just going to throw out something crazy, just thinking out loud. For instance, if it matters if we met like every meeting in Sacramento, and that greatly facilitated the schedule, and it relieved the stress on everybody. Is that a factor, for instance? And if that, given people's availability in the schedule, maybe that should be a consideration.
I mean, that would certainly be much more doable. Our team that puts us on in Sacramento is in Sacramento. We'd have presumably locations where we could do this in Sacramento on a regular basis.
I think we need to do some polling amongst the task force, because I think When we originally set out to do in-person hearings, the reason why we decided to list all these different cities is because we wanted to meet the community where they were. So, meet folks in Oakland if they couldn't, go anywhere else. Meet folks in San Diego, meet folks in Sacramento, meet folks in Inland Empire, meet folks in Richmond or Inglewood or Allensworth. But now I think what you're saying, Member Tamaki, is that you think that we should revisit that plan?
Well,
because
I guess given the schedule, that I'd love to do that original plan if it's, doable, but given the schedule, I guess I'm asking, is it still practical?
I agree with that. I mean, I initially suggested Allensworth, but I think that's going to be a tall task to try to pull this meeting off in Allensworth, and I think we would be better suited if it were in Sacramento or in Los Angeles again, where people can readily access it and be there. So I would move to even scratch Allensworth, because I just think other than historic location, we gain nothing there, even from a population standpoint.
Variables went into how we organize this. Like, so for instance, with Allensworth, we were also thinking about the fact that that would be technically the last meeting, although it might not be anymore, but that we know that that will be the meeting when we release the final report. So for purposes of optics, education, Allensworth was an important consideration. But, there are other places, sorry. But, I agree generally that we may want to revisit some of these places that do seem too inconvenient in terms of the burdens and benefits. But there is a burdens benefits analysis that should go on. And I think one of the things that we should be thinking about in terms of burdens is, leading up to that meeting, what is going to be the workload that each of us is facing? So I know that May is going to be the month from hell, right? So we should be thinking about, that's how I'm sort of organizing it. I imagine that December is going to be difficult because of people's family obligations in December. So that adds another variable to think about. And we should always, virtual is a possibility that we should all be thinking about, doing virtual in lieu of in-person on some of these meetings where we might not have as many benefits from going to a remote place.
So I think, just for your schedules, based on this schedule, just the schedules, probably going to be the most work for members of the task force leading up to the February meeting, because that's where your initial presentations will be for the outlines and discussion of your proposals. And then from February to March is going to be, based on our experience in the first time, the sprint, where we're really taking all the recommendations from the task force, from the discussions of the outlines, and finalizing the draft. So February to March meetings is going to be a sprint. That's going to be a big workload. I mean, most of that will be shouldered by our attorneys who will be, working at your direction, but where you're going to have to be giving us a lot of feedback and making decisions on how things are going to be written, and then a lot of reviewing and editing and commenting, and then preparing your presentations back to the task force in the March meeting when that initial draft is presented, is probably going to be the most work. I'm hoping, like with first interim report, the feedback that we got once we presented that initial draft was pretty complimentary. I think people were pretty much on board. There were a number of edits and feedback, but I think we were pretty good at that point. So I do think if you were going to consider it, the February meeting might be a meeting where being online and you all not having to travel and being able to use that time, may make sense. I was just talking with Trini, and obviously we can, like I said, we can find locations, we can find places to do it. I think as we've experienced, where we're going to have witness testimony and presentations. Online, probably facilitates that better because they have the ability, we're all online, they're online, and there's a much easier ability for them to communicate with everybody in the virtual space. But where we're maybe going through reports and sitting and writing through and meeting with one another about that might make more sense in person. We can, I'm very hesitant to steer you in any direction. It's really your determination. We will make happen whatever you all vote on. I want to make that very clear. The idea is just to make sure that these meetings are done in a way that allow you to take care of all your work.
I just want to be open in that my concern is that if we decide to go all virtual, which I'm not saying that that's what we're doing. My concern is that we're potentially depriving the benefit of the public for us to meet them where they are, and kind of overprivileging what the DOJ thinks is convenient or not to do. The statute says, you all are supposed to give us technical, legal, and administrative assistance, and, there's additional money provided for that. So, I'm just being transparent about how I feel. I do think it is difficult, not only for the DOJ, but task force members to kind of, meet in person in these locations, but I do think in part is necessary in order to meet the public where they are. And to benefit folks in the public. Because, for instance, there's people who are emailing me all the time. When are you guys coming to Oakland? When are you coming here? When are you coming there? So it's just what I'm thinking.
That this matter will be determined on the basis of the practical arrangements and what's humanly possible to deliver, and that we would get back from the staff what their analysis is and give it to you, and the decision be made by you.
So just to clarify, so we have the December meeting is currently scheduled for Oakland. That's that needs to be decided today, obviously, whether that's going to be in person or virtual. And Vice Chair Brown, what you're suggesting is we sort of put together based on the...
What I'm saying is that even for Oakland, if it's just not humanly possible for us to have a meeting and that thing will function, we'll be able to connect with the public, it would make sense to even look at Oakland. We'll go virtual.
Also, I have a quick question. If we go virtual, will we do the Blue Jeans, or are we going to do the new system, DOJ Zoom?
Are we...
I will make it not
Okay, Member Grills and then Member Bradford.
So I was wondering if we could maybe consider a hybrid option in the following way, because I think some of the in-person is important. And so I'm also mindful of what was said earlier about the crunch time coming around February, March. So what if the December, the January, and the February meetings were in person in various locations, and then from there, the March, April, and May are virtual, which allows us to still have our meetings, but we're not using valuable time that's going to be needed to write and edit finish up the report, and then we go back to in-person in June.
I would think, what about, I just have a question. Did you consider like flipping it? Like what it would look like for the first 3 months to be virtual and then the rest to be, I'm just curious if you like consider if there's any, do you have any thoughts on
If we
that?
flipped it, though, in flipping it, we're going to be knee-deep in trying to get that report out the door. And I just think that, you know, the travel time and the staff having to take their time to go to virtual, you know, in-person spaces would be a drain.
Towards the end of the process rather than the beginning, that's what you're saying?
Yeah, so we go virtual toward the end, except for the very final meeting. So in December, January, and February, we continue with in-person, decide on the cities, and then March, April, and May, we go virtual, which, you know, allows the staff to stay focused and us not to use travel time. That travel time could be used for report work. And then in June, we go back to in-person.
Maybe we can do a poll on that suggestion.
Motion that Dr. Grills' recommendation will be adopted.
So it has been properly moved by Member Grills and, it's been properly moved by Vice Chair Brown and properly seconded by Member Bradford that we adopt Member Grills' plan, and that plan would be the first 3 meetings, December, January, and February, remain in person, and we can decide the locations. The March, April, and May meetings will be virtual, and then our last meeting will be in person. Is there any discussion on the matter?
The one thing I just want to confirm for the in-person meetings, Oakland, San Diego, and Sacramento are going to be the best for Wi-Fi and connectivity. So I think, and a location and hotels and all those things. So I think I would just, I would guess, I will say this. Can you confirm that those locations are going to still correspond to those dates
I'm okay with those.
as part of the motion?
Call for the question.
Okay, I'll the question. So I'll go to Parliamentarian Johnson for a roll call vote, and we'll address that in a different motion.
I'll begin with the chair.
Aye.
Chair Moore,
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown.
Yes?
I'm sorry, sir.
Yes.
Thank you. Member Bradford.
Here, just use this.
Aye.
Thank you. Member Grills? Aye. Member Holder? Aye. Member Lewis?
Aye.
Member Montgomery Steppe?
Aye.
Member Tamaki?
Aye.
Madam Chair, there were 8 members present and voting, 8 ayes and 0 nays.
Thank you. There were 8 ayes and 0 nays. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. Our December, January, and February meetings will be in person. Our March, April, and May meetings will be virtual, and our final meeting in June will be in person. So I guess now to go back to Attorney Newman's comment on confirming the locations for at least the first three in-person meetings. Maybe we can also solidify where our final location will be for our final hearing, or we can do that at a later date.
I thought that was part of the already motion.
That for San Diego, I also have staff available and additional folks from the mayor's office and all of that. And we've been brainstorming locations, and we'll just definitely keep in mind, what's really important to me is that we hear every single person that has prepared to come, that we've invited to come, and that we be able to take in that testimony fully. And so we'll just keep those in mind, but we're available in San Diego, so that shouldn't be an issue at all.
Recommend maybe getting in touch with District 3 Councilmember Cara Five to see if she can help the DOJ and the task force in accommodating logistics.
Thank you all for the recommendations and support.
Okay, so the locations will stay the same. I don't think there needs to be a motion for that since it's already on the page. Are there any other comments or questions from the DOJ?
If you wanted to, you don't have to decide that now, you can decide at a future meeting. But if you wanted to have the June meeting somewhere near Allensworth, that was something that was discussed a few times during the process. If that's what you want to do for a commemorative meeting where essentially that meeting is going to be releasing the report.
That would be nice. Final. Yeah, that's going to be the final, yeah.
And we'll need time to figure out where that's going to be as close as possible.
Mr. Gross?
So I wanted to, I'm not sure if this would go here or not, but in terms of the meeting agenda, I'm wondering if the task force might consider including in our agenda the following: building in some time, whether that's 2 hours in the existing 2-day period, whether that is adding a half day, adding 2 hours in the evening, but that we open the space, focus solely on personal testimony related to the 13 areas of harm. I suggest that for a number of reasons, but I think that being able to have those personal stories will deepen our understanding of the nuance of how these things are operating. It could also help us to have greater empathy and sensitivity to what we have been talking about with these different areas of harm, but it's been from the perspective primarily of expert witnesses, academics, experts, et cetera. And we did have periodically a few examples of personal testimony in the beginning, in our first year, and I think that it was pretty powerful. And remembering what our witnesses said this morning in terms of the Japanese reparations, one of the most impactful components of their efforts was that personal testimony. In particular, it built community within the Japanese American community, and it also helped to educate the public, so it spoke to people's hearts as well as their minds.
I think that's a brilliant idea. Thank you for that suggestion.
To that, when we say personal stories, and relating back to the Japanese American hearings that were powerful, the personal stories are different from positions or exhortations. In other words, in the Japanese American hearing, there was witnesses who talked about a brother who walked too close to the barbed wire fence line, and from 300 yards away, a sentry took aim, shot, and killed him with a single shot in the chest. People had not heard that before because no inquest was held, and the guard was exonerated. Here, for instance, in the interim report, you have the Odell Short family, for example. In 1943, they move into a house that the Odell family built. And the sheriff says, if I were you, you need to go back to your black neighborhood. Vigilantes warn him to get out. 2 weeks later, as disclosed in the report, there's an explosion. Witnesses see the mother, Helen, trying to beat back the flames consuming her children. All family members died. San Bernardino Police Department concludes it was an accident. The Attorney General concludes no evidence of vigilante activity could be found. You know, those kinds of stories, and the stories of people here in this room, frankly, that people have actually gone through, whether it's the Great Migration of grandparents or whether it's, current day. We heard some testimony in the listening sessions about a father turned down by 3 or 4 landlords trying to move out of the neighborhood because gang members were threatening to kill his son. I think that's different. That's a different story than an advocacy or an exhortation or an urging or something like that. And so we dealt with that too, and tried to make a distinction between, actually disclosing the human side of what happened and the consequences versus taking a position. And so I think what you're talking about is something like that, which means that some careful attention has to be gotten to get people who are willing to share their story. And maybe they never shared it before because it's so damn painful. And for those people, coaxing them out, or maybe not, but in our struggle, we actually worked with those witnesses. We helped them get prepared, and we made sure the press was there and cameras were on. And so when the country saw that, it did move the needle of public opinion. So there's a difference here between even our public comment, even the comments in the listening session, and personal stories. So if that's what you're talking about, I'm totally with you.
Yeah,
Just
that's what I'm
based upon
talking
my
about.
experience.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
So was that for just one hearing or over a series of?
Well, and I guess it raises a question about whether we could actually do this effectively within the context of all the business we have to do in our public hearings. But if you're asking me about the commission hearings, we had 10 of them in every major city, and they were 1- and 2-day events. So I think we have to talk about how practical this is, and if it is not practical, I would still urge this task force to find a way and get it funded to hold a different kind of hearing. And if anybody's interested in video clips of the hearings that we had, they're quite dramatic. I mean, in some of these places, it wasn't a dry eye in the room when people got through, testifying. And some of the people had sort of been so hardened to it that when they testified what they went through, they didn't think so much of it, but others who heard it, it moved them. So I guess my point is, Member Grills, I think you're onto something, and we have to determine as a practical matter whether it fits within the context of a hearing when we've got all this stuff to do by June of 2023. And if it's too much to shoehorn in there something this important, then maybe we ought to be thinking about another kind of thing. And it could be, again, I'm not sure how we do this on the schedule and everything, but maybe there is completely separate where you devote a day to this kind of thing, or multiple days.
Right, I was thinking that if we did something that was consistent with the 3 in-person meetings, we would then have the opportunity to hear from people from different parts of the state. It might require us to, extend like day 1 and have after dinner an evening session that was devoted just to this. That would then allow people not, to attend and not have to miss work, and more of the community could hear it and see it, or we add an extra.
And make sure the press is there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Madam Chair,
Vice Chair Brown, you're recognized.
all we have to do is extend the invitation. People will show up. Just let them know. They will be here. All we have to do is let them know, get the word out, and know the network that really gets the word out and cover all four corners of these communities. They will come, but we got to get the word out, visually, orally, and written.
Okay, so I think we need to move on, but we're already discussing what we need to move on to, which is the agenda for the next meeting. But yeah, just to tie up loose ends, I think, again, what Member Grills offered is brilliant. I'm personally in favor of those evening sessions after the three in-person, after each of the three in-person meetings. We also are in the process of hiring a communications consultant. So in the event that we wanted to do a separate event, in light of what Tamaki said, we could work on that through them. There's also probably space and time at our final hearing, where press definitely will be there in full, and we could allow space and time for additional personal testimony on those 13 areas as well.
Chair Moore, excuse me. For the December meeting, we have the quorum for the Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Perhaps what you are suggesting could be accomplished on a Wednesday evening before the meeting, because we don't have any current availability for after the meeting. And maybe in future agendas, it may be the day after. But if you wanted to schedule something like that, we could do an evening session on Wednesday for the personal stories, and then the task force would meet on Thursday and Friday.
Okay, thank you for that.
Are we meeting on Tuesday evening?
For December, the quorum is on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday.
Thursday would be better.
So then that would just be an evening session following the conclusion of the task force business.
So this agenda still says November, but it would be December, right?
So the agenda that was circulated, because of the votes and the way everything's been set up with the advisory committees during this meeting, doesn't necessarily reflect the conversation. So the task force can really do whatever it wants with this agenda. It still could work if you want to have a testimonial focused meeting. But we will need to add in time for reporting out from the experts and advisory committees on the interim and final recommendations as we laid out in the future meeting plan.
Jamaki, you recognize?
Yeah, so, again, this is just me thinking out loud, just based upon what our community went through. If we do this, it should be done with some care. It should be orchestrated and prepared. In other words, if we just call for people to come out, it might work, it might not work. We, in our community, we had to identify people who had good stories and arrange for the press to be there, arrange for community support to be there. It takes a lot of work to do that. So, it's produced, actually. The stories are authentic, they're accurate, they're true, but it still has to be produced. And, you got to have also the media there. So there's a fair amount of preparation that goes into this. So if we make this commitment, that means we really got to get behind it. And if it's in Oakland, to work with local folks there to identify, some key people. I mean, others could be there too, but identify key people that really, really have compelling stories. And there are there, but people have to be approached.
Not us.
So that's just, one caution I want to throw out.
I think that would be too soon to try to come up with this by December in Oakland.
Excuse me, Madam Chair.
Yes.
I'm in Oakland, I know the Bay Area. I've been there for 47 years. But seriously, this is not being arrogant. We have quality, competent publicists that we can put to work. Number two, we have a built-in network that has many tendrils out there. Trust me, we know how to work miracles. So we can do it.
Okay, no, the only thing I was gonna say, okay, we can do it. I was gonna offer, we could do something for Black History Month in February. Since that meeting is gonna be virtual, we can do maybe a in-person event. It kind of corresponds with Black History. It gets people riled up and ready for our June release, but we can do in October. I'm totally fine with that. Okay. And then I was going to suggest, as a happy medium, to incorporate Grill's suggestion, we just extend public comment for the rest of the 3 in-person hearings. So my idea was we extend public comment for the December, January, and February meeting, and we do an orchestrated event in February for Black History Month or something like that. But that's just my idea. I don't dictate or decide.
Madam Chair, are you saying hold the February meeting on a certain date, or are you saying use that February meeting for a Black History Month event as well?
No, I was saying the Sacramento meeting would stay as is with that particular topic, but then there would be an extra event or like an extra day. But I'm really just thinking out loud. And I would like to just probably defer to Vice Chair Brown or anyone else who has some other thoughts around what we could do. Another thing that I just want to get out there, I think, which corresponds with what Mayor Lee said, I want to get you all's thoughts as my fellow task force members about the idea of inviting different leaders throughout California who are heading municipal, city, or county reparations initiatives across the state.
Yeah.
Well, we had Michael Lawson here yesterday, who's heading up to City of LA's Reparations Task Force and also is the president of LA Urban League, so I would probably be key to invite him back for our next meeting as well, or at the appropriate time.
So I had a question to the attorney. So for the December, the December meeting where there's 2 witness panels, do you think that could potentially be an appropriate time to invite, these city and county leaders of different reparative justice measures? Would that assist in our work at all at that particular time? Don't know.
So first of all, you all can set the panels however you wish. I will say, I think there's 2 different concepts. For our purposes, it would be good to know. I think there's a discussion about specifically inviting and welcoming specific individuals with stories as opposed to just an open forum. That's important for us to get clarification on exactly what the plan is. And of course, we'd be looking to the members, as with all the witnesses, to tell us who to be in touch with, to invite to offer personal testimonies as you're talking about. So I think that would be very important to be very clear on, that it's a intentional inviting of specific people with experiences rather than a forum. And then in terms of the witness panels, so I recognize that the witness panels on the future hearing schedule that we just worked through are different from the witness panels that are in this meeting ahead plan. Can you scroll down a little bit? They're different from the witness panels that are that were delineated in your materials. My message to you is however you want to schedule that meeting, however you want to set that meeting up, we just need to make sure that we have time for the work in each of the coming meetings. So probably one day reserved for reporting out from the experts and the advisory committees on interim or final recommendations. So the delineation is going to be probably need to be 1 day working day and 1 day witness days, a little bit like this meeting. But I want to make sure you all have time to hear from the other advisory committees, weigh what's being discussed, and make the decisions that'll need to be made. And I wanted that to cut into witness testimony.
I think it's important. Hello? Okay. I think it is important to try and liaise with, the different municipal organizations that are working on these questions. I think it would be opportune to do it in an open meeting, given the fact that in the Bay Area there are several different cities and counties who are working on some variation of a local reparations initiative. There is Carol Fife working on kind of like a Black New Deal program in Oakland. There is, of course, San Francisco and Alameda counties respectively working on their initiatives. There's the city of Hayward working on a Russell City initiative. So I think, given that those are like 4 or 5 that I just named, they're all in the Bay Area. So it could be opportune. And then I know what's happening here in LA, but I think just taking a view as to geographically where some of these initiatives are, having that happen in Oakland might be beneficial.
So would that look like just an additional panel or reserved for those leaders, or?
I don't think you necessarily need an additional panel. I guess the idea is this, the delineation of panels was key to sort of an earlier plan, so you can pull away from those panels and just start from scratch with panels.
But what about this plan where it says witness panel 1 and witness panel 2? Those are still on the table, right?
Yes, you all can do whatever you want.
No, okay, great. I understand that. I was just wondering and just making sure to ensure that we have something on our agenda that is going to help move this process along. Okay, so let me go back. So I think based on what we just discussed, I think we should have a space on the agenda to invite leaders of these municipal reparations programs across the state. I think when we had our public hearing in San Francisco, you got the press out. And so I think there is an opportunity for us to have that type of orchestrated event because there are connections there. So what I'm proposing the agenda might look like, of course, is 1, we have the report out of the different 10 committees. We invite these municipal leaders, and then maybe the following day, we have that orchestrated event where we allow folks to provide that personal testimony. Is there anything that I'm missing? Is there anything that should be changed?
Personal testimony is in the evening.
Oh, in the evening. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Chair Moore, just to clarify, are you saying the witness panel on that Member Lewis was just talking about as well as the 2 witness panels that we talked about on this plan, or scrap those 2. But then we do, like I said, we need to make sure we have a lot of time for the task force to do the work for the report preparation.
Yeah.
So like, that's probably 1 day.
Okay. So so that's just me misunderstanding, because I thought witness panel 1 and 2 were related to the committees that we just made, but they're not. They're separate. Witness
No.
panel.
I'm sorry.
Witness panel 1, testimony and suggestions regarding potential remedies and remedial programs. Witness panel 2, legal, legislative, and program administrative experts' suggestions for addressing harms delineated in the report.
That would essentially be similar to the witness testimony in the first phase, where that witness testimony would inform the final decisions of the task force as to the reparations plan. So those witnesses are in furtherance of the work of the advisory committees, but then the advisory committees will need, according to the plan that we set out, to present their preliminary discussion. So the idea might be 3 witness panels on the first day, and then the second day for the advisory committees to report out and have the task force discuss all of the different issues. And then if you chose to have the personal testimony, that would be the night of the first day of the meeting. So it'd almost be like day 1, night 1, day 2.
Okay.
Night 1.
And just to further clarify, so I'm understanding, those first 2 panels, the folks we're inviting to give testimony, not the municipal leaders, but the people we're inviting, would they be our already retained experts or new people that we would be inviting?
You'd be inviting other people with experiences outside of the task force to offer their testimony. Again, it's similar to what we did in the first phase, where we had people coming and testifying about what turned out to be each of the chapters in the report. You would have experts who have handled the allocation of remedies or operated remedial programs or engaged in legal or legislative advocacy on a variety of different harms. So you'd be inviting testimony from experts. The economics experts would be part of essentially the other day that they'd be weighing in on the recommendations of each of the advisory committees.
Okay. Okay, so to recap, in Oakland, the first day would be dedicated to those 3 witness panels. So the first 2 witness panels that are already on the page, and the third would be inviting different municipal leaders of reparative justice initiatives across the state. And then that evening, we would allow for a space of orchestrated personal testimony and invite the press. And then the second day would be relegated or dedicated to the 10 subcommittees, advisory committees, reporting out the work we will be doing or we would have done between now and our December meeting. Okay.
That's correct. And then if you want to have the special invited personal testimonies, you have to figure out where that'll be in terms of the agenda at night.
Day 1 at night or day 2 at night, you're saying? Okay. I'd like to acknowledge member Reggie Jones Sawyer.
I'd like to make a motion that we officially adopt that as our schedule.
But we have to decide what night do we want the personal testimony, day 1 or day 2? And you said it's, what day is our quorum?
Just to clarify, you have a quorum on December 14, 15, and 16. So it'd be 2 of those days for the meeting. Wednesday the 14th, Thursday the 15th, Friday the 16th. And you have to decide which of those days you want to have the meeting on, and of those days, which of the days you want to have the special session, if you want to have it in the December meeting.
Definitely, I think Dr. Brown said Thursday night, but definitely Wednesday or Thursday night.
Okay.
Because Friday, I will say I would not want to do that.
Thursday.
Wednesday and Thursday.
Okay, so the first day of meetings would be Wednesday, and then the second day of meetings would be Thursday, and then we would have the special event Thursday evening. Is that what we said?
That's it, yes, that's what.
Okay, okay. So I entertain a motion on this. Do we-
I move that the stated schedule will be adopted.
Okay, it has been properly moved by Vice Chair Brown and properly seconded by Member Bradford that our, oh, sorry. By Member Reggie Jones Sawyer, excuse me, that our next meeting will be in December, on December 14th and December 15th. That's a Wednesday and a Thursday. So the first day, December 14th, will be dedicated to 3 witness panels. So the first 2 panels we've already discussed, that's on the page. The third panel would allow for us to invite municipal leaders of different reparative justice efforts across the state. And then the second day would be dedicated to the 10 subcommittees that we created this afternoon to give out reports as to the work that we've been doing over the past 2 months it will be. And then that night, Thursday evening, we will have that special event inviting folks to provide personal testimony on the 13 harms or atrocities outlined in our interim report. And we will invite press. Is there any discussion on the matter? Hearing no further discussion, I'll turn to Parliamentarian Johnson so we can establish a roll call vote.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will begin the vote with a call with Chair Moore,
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown,
Aye.
Member Bradford. Aye. Member Grills.
Aye.
Member Holder. Aye. Member Jones Sawyer. Aye. Member Lewis.
Aye.
Member Montgomery Stepp.
Aye.
Member Tamaki.
Aye.
Madam Chair, there were 9 members present and voting. There were 9 ayes and 0 nays.
Thank you. There are 9 ayes and 0 nays. The ayes have it, and so the motion carries. The next item on the agenda is unfinished business and potential action. I don't think there's any unfinished business, but I'll ask the DOJ if there is. But since Member Jones Sawyer is here, I wanted to ask Member Jovan Scott Lewis if he could update Member Jones Sawyer on what we discussed in terms of the 10 subcommittees or 10 advisory committees. No?
In terms of what?
Because we assigned you work, so. Okay.
It's right in your wheelhouse. I'll talk to you about it. We're working on it together.
Okay. All right, I guess people are ready to go. All right.
But I have
Go ahead.
I have an item.
Okay, so, did you have something?
Yeah, I have an item.
Go ahead.
If we're still on unfinished business, I know that stuff got moved to unfinished business yesterday. And it's also related to what we just discussed, which is the next month's meeting. I think that, given the fact that there's legislation pending that could change the scope of power and work and the time frame of AB 3121, we have an obligation to discuss the change as a task force. And if and when it happens, I think that, we're going to have to address it as a task force and think about how it's changing our scope of work, adding to our powers, and adding to our time frame. So I think it's going to be important for the next meeting, when we will have definitive information whether or not these changes and amendments are occurring, that we reserve time to discuss and, if necessary, take action related to the new powers authorized in any amended legislation. So I would move that we reserve time in the next meeting to discuss that issue.
Clarification on that. The governor may not sign that, so it just sounds to me like, wait, hold on. If the governor does sign it, we absolutely have to discuss it. If the governor doesn't sign it, it's a moot point. So I guess the motion would be, the safest motion would be a contingent motion, that if the governor doesn't sign, it appear as an agenda item because there's nothing to discuss. But if the governor does sign, I think we have a duty to discuss it. So if the parliamentarian can provide some guidance as to whether such a contingent motion is appropriate, it seems to me that, if it is, that would be the appropriate way to frame this. And it becomes a non-issue if he doesn't sign. But if he signs, I think vetoes it. If he signs it, then I think we're duty-bound to discuss it. Because, it's the change in the law.
Yes, if the bill is signed, then it would be relevant to the motion that would be made. It would be appropriate. So if you do a contingent motion, then it would be framed that in the event the bill is signed, then you would like an agenda item to discuss whatever it is your motion is.
Okay, so then I'll craft a motion that in the event that the bill is signed that amends the powers under AB 3121, we reserve 60 minutes in the next meeting to discuss and, if necessary, take action related to those new powers authorized in any amended legislation.
That is fine. I would recommend that you put the bill number in so that you know what bill you're talking about.
22, can you
2296.
interlineate 2296 so I don't have to say it all over again? So, okay,
No, we'll just put the bill number in.
okay.
Okay. Yes. Well, that's the chair's prerogative. The chair is now ripe for a second.
It has been properly moved by Member Holder and then properly seconded by Member Jones Sawyer that if Governor Gavin Newsom signs AB 2296 into law, 60 minutes will be reserved on our agenda for December to discuss next steps. Is there any discussion on the matter?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I would like to speak in opposition to that. Why waste energy and time on something that has not happened? If it happens, it happens. We should take it, in my estimation, one day at a time. Because basic and fundamental, as I've said all along, it's just my little opinion. It was not necessary. Now, why should we spend our time discussing something that hasn't happened? And if he does, then we have to deal with it.
Make a comment?
Yeah.
So I think you're absolutely right, Dr. Brown. If it's vetoed, then it doesn't, according to this motion, it's not on the agenda. We waste no time. But if it is signed, we won't be able to discuss it in December because it hasn't been agendized. It's my understanding, the way it works.
That's correct.
So the safest thing to do is to pass a contingent motion that gives the possibility for that option. If it's not signed, nobody wastes time on this. If it is signed, I think we're duty-bound as early as possible to discuss it. And the task force may decide to do nothing, but at least it should be on the agenda for discussion. But provided that it's signed. If it's not signed, no discussion.
Is there any other discussion on the matter? Hearing no further discussion, I'll go to Parliamentarian Johnson to establish a roll call vote on the motion.
Thank you. Chair Moore,
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown,
No.
Vice Chair Brown votes no. Member Bradford,
Aye.
Member Bradford votes aye. Member Grills,
Aye.
Member Grills votes aye. Member Holder,
Aye.
Member Holder votes aye. Member Jones Sawyer, Member Jones Sawyer votes aye. Member Lewis?
Aye.
Member Lewis votes aye. Member Montgomery Steppe? Member Montgomery Steppe votes aye. Member Tamaki?
Aye.
Member Tamaki votes aye. Madam Chair, there were 9 members present and voting. There were 8 ayes and 1 nay.
Thank you. There are 8 ayes and 1 nay. The ayes have it, and so the motion carries. In the event that Governor Newsom signs AB 2296 into law, there will be a discussion on the matter at our December meeting for 60 minutes. Thank you. So now we're at the last item on our agenda, which is closing remarks from task force members. Thank you all, members of the public, for participating these 2 days. I also want to thank Member Reggie Jones Sawyer and his staff for assisting in these 2 days. Everyone give him a hand. All right. Is there any other closing remarks from our task force members?
I want to say real quick, we also are available to gather people to tell their stories in San Diego as well, if that is needed, and we continue in that vein. Thank you.
Thank you. Hearing no other closing remarks, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all.